they know what they've done for 25 years is valuable. And they also believe that the teacher down the hall who's been doing something for 25 years is valuable. So when that teacher of 25 years hears his or her peer of 25 years talking about things differently, even though they may be foundationally the same, but differently, that process opens the minds. Welcome to Learning Through Technology, a K-12 EdTech podcast proudly presented by STS Education. I'm Alex Inman, founder of Educational Collaborators.
And I'm Bob Cerruti, founder of the EduTech Group. We're here to bring educators together, helping them unlock the full potential of learning through technology.
Tune in every other week as we connect with education leaders and dive deep into topics that matter to you, delivering actionable ideas straight to your school. Welcome to the show. Hi, everyone. This episode is going to be a little bit different than some of our traditional episodes. I was invited to be a guest on the School Leaders Project podcast, hosted by Cindy Blackburn and sponsored by Toddle, a partner of ours who creates a really spectacular learning management system. So Cindy really interviews some amazing guests on that podcast. And so I have no idea how I got invited to be a guest on their podcast, but she's really wonderful. And I think you'll enjoy this episode. Now, Bob's not here, but if he were, he would say, wow, Alex, long episode. Yeah, indeed, because as Bob would tell you, I'm sure I was the only one talking. So it runs a little long, but I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. I hope you get a lot out of it.
Alex Inman, I am so excited to have you here on the School Leaders Project. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, are you kidding? Absolutely. And in fact, like with all the amazing guests that you've interviewed on the show, I'm not really sure that I belong, but I'm glad to be here nonetheless.
Get out of here. I'm so excited to have you. And, we got to chat a little bit before recording, and I just think you bring such a cool perspective on change management. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Could you kind of set the stage for our audience, introduce yourself and the work you do that you're most passionate about?
Sure. So I'm Alex Inman. I'm the Chief Academic Officer of Pacific OneSource, which is sort of like an EdTech holding company that has 4 EdTech companies in it, one of which is Educational Collaborators, which I founded back when I was a tech director, coming on 17 years ago. I was just a tech director who was interested in providing our teachers the best that we could find. And I found that a lot of those were my colleagues and peers in other amazing schools and districts doing amazing things. And so we created a group of experts in the field to provide sort of consulting and PD services to other schools. And so now that's all I do. Now I just, do the Chief Academic Officer thing and then run the Educational Collaborators. And so, I've been a tech director for 22 years, started the first one-to-one program in Wisconsin. And I guess there's probably 2 things that I like, the things that really drive me. One is I like starting new things. I just love starting new things. I think what I love is not knowing what I'm doing and trying to figure it out as I go along. That's what I love about starting new things. And the other thing that I love is pulling people together and watching teams do amazing things. And so when I started a company that basically pulled people together to do amazing things, I could not have been happier.
I love that. Well, and when we first talked, you used a cool phrase. You said 1 + 1 = 3. And you used that in terms of the idea of collaboration. So could you kind of expand on the importance of that, and especially in the EdTech community, why we should be collaborating with each other?
Are you ready to revolutionize your classroom? Join us at FETC 2025, the premier conference for education technology, from January 14 to 17 at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. Connect with thousands of educators, discover innovative tools, and gain insights to enhance your teaching. Register by December 13th to take advantage of our early bird pricing and use promo code TechLearn2025, no spaces, for an additional 10% off. Visit FETC.org to register now.
ViewSonic is your go-to technology partner for engaging students, fostering collaboration, and elevating learning outcomes. Offering a broad array of future-ready audiovisual solutions, training, and tools that adapt to your school's changing needs. ViewSonic is more than a brand. It's your educational edge. Explore the possibilities today at viewsonic.com/edu.
Imagine a future where students can access tools that spark learning, growth, and creativity. At Lenovo, our K-12 solutions are designed to create a world where EdTech tools are safe and secure, engaging and easy to use, and built for productivity wherever learning takes place. We partner with customers and value lasting relationships. We work closely with you to assess your needs, evaluate options, and customize solutions. We understand the dynamics and trends shaping K-12 today and tomorrow and how they affect your specific situation. We can help you plan wisely to deploy and scale solutions that will deliver the best student and teacher experiences and improve learning outcomes. We do this all while implementing the right education technology for your use case and budget. Visit us at the link in the show notes below.
Hey there, it's Sophia, executive producer for the show. You know those moments when the episode ends and you're thinking, man, I wish we could talk more about this. Well, guess what? We can. We got this amazing community over on LinkedIn. It's where we share all the good stuff, sneak peeks, cool resources, and quick activities to try out in your school. So here's what I want you to do. Grab your phone, head to LinkedIn, and search for our Learning Through Technology podcast page. Hit that follow button, and boom, you're in. Can't wait to see you there.
Yeah. So back to that sort of 1 + 1 = 3 thing. I think in junior high, I read a book about Buckminster Fuller. He was an architect and an engineer. So a lot of people know the golf ball at Epcot Center, which is actually a geodesic dome, right? So the geodesic dome was created by Buckminster Fuller, and he was the first guy who kind of created the mathematical truth or proof that synergy exists, right? That the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so 1 + 1 can equal 3, but only if you put it together the right way, right? And that's what synergy is, right? So the geodesic dome covers the great amount of space with the least amount of material and creates a greater amount of strength, right? So it's a powerful sort of metaphor. So our logo actually in Educational Collaborators is basically one of the little shapes on the geodesic dome, right? Like if you took the geodesic dome and you took like one of those bumps out and looked at the shape, it would be our logo, right?
Fun facts.
And so, yeah. So it's a little, homage to Bucky Fuller and some of his creative work. But so first off, mathematically, 1 + 1 can equal 3, right? And not exactly that, but nonetheless, you can show that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that can be done by collaborating, right? By bringing in the right people, doing the right stuff to learn from and work with one another. And so the ISED listserv, this is a listserv that is used by independent schools, just celebrated its 30th anniversary. Which is
storied.
pretty long time for a listserv, right? So I have been on that listserv for probably about 28 years, right? Of those 30 years. And I got on because I was a tech director who was asked to start the first 1-to-1 program in the state. There were only like 10 other schools and districts that had 1-to-1 in the US. None of us knew what we were doing. And I was also a first-time tech director. So I just didn't know what I was doing. And so it was a community, an online community, where we all asked one another questions, learned from one another, and grew with one another. And I've relied heavily on the power of the crowd my entire career. And I think that with the right kind of structure, which I think is important, the crowd can be enormously more powerful than the sum of the parts.
Well, and you've really brought that spirit into Education Collaborative. But I'm wondering, because you've mentioned the structure and how important that is. And do you think that happens more organically, or is it a really intentional thing that we as leaders cultivate?
No, if it happens organically, you were just darn lucky. It really needs to be deliberate. Now, it can look different, but I believe it needs to be deliberate, right? And there are things that you can do to make that deliberate process work, right? So before design thinking was a big thing, we were still doing change management, but I'm a big fan of design thinking because I think it provides a lot of structure, organization, and scholarship to what I think is just good process, right? And a lot of components and elements of design thinking have been around for a while. Like I'm a certified Lean Six Sigma guy, right? I'm not a black belt, but I've been doing my training there. So those sorts of processes have been around for a while. In Educational Collaborators, we kind of made our own and then refined it over the years. But design thinking is a great way to think about it. And I like to talk about that because it's a very accessible bit of information that you can get.
Well, I just love a good system, and I think design thinking is so transferable, like you said, to so many different contexts. So can you give us a little bit more context of the types of problems you're typically solving in schools?
Yeah. So we started as an organization around one-to-one change management because it was so different. Yeah, I was a tech director, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we're always dealing with change, but this was a different kind of change, right? Like a new email system, people kind of get what you're supposed to do, right? And yeah, there's change associated with it. And now my email is connected with my calendar and I can collaborate a little bit more, right? Like those are changes that need to happen, but they're more like changes in process and tools, right? Like I was using a hammer and now I'm using a nail gun, right? Like, okay, same thing, different technology. I got to learn how to line up things better with the nail gun because it's less forgiving, right? But fundamentally, it's just a small tweak, right?
Right.
One-to-one was a radical change because it fundamentally changed the role of the teacher. Now, there are still a lot of schools who are one-to-one that have not fundamentally changed the role of the teacher, but pre-internet and access that one-to-one offered, the teacher was the sole source of information, or at minimally the primary source of information, right? So lesson design was about taking the information and knowledge that you wanted them to have, right? Structuring it, figuring out how to transfer that information and knowledge and the context of that knowledge to the students, right? And that was pretty much all the teacher's job because nobody else was doing that, right? Now, every student has access to a pool of information at their fingertips that from an information standpoint is greater than the collective knowledge, not wisdom, collective knowledge of the entire faculty in the building, right? And they have it like that. That creates a fundamental shift in the role of the teacher. Now, I don't have to package that content in the same way, right? Or it's a whole lot easier. If I'm using, I swear this isn't just a planned plug, but if I'm using Toddle, right? And I've got all that information in there and my standards and my students' performance, and I can use the AI to structure that, boom, right? Like it's an absolute game changer, right? And so you need a different kind of change management when you're fundamentally changing the context and the way and the role that people play, right? So this was a big deal and I did a terrible job like everybody did at the beginning, but we at least began to recognize that, okay, whoa, you have to handle this differently. So that's kind of where we started. And though we support schools and districts in all sorts of different changes, moving from Microsoft to Google or whatever, and that kind of stuff, I would say that AI is now kind of for that example that I just gave. That AI is probably, I haven't seen a change this big since one-to-one.
Before we go into AI then, if you could turn back time on implementing one-to-one, what do you think are those biggest lessons that you've learned of things that should have been done or you wish you could have done differently that you might apply towards AI?
Yeah, that's great. And it's actually what we sort of founded originally Educational Collaborators around was, okay, now we get a chance to do this over. And I had a chance to do it over. I started a one-to-one program, ran it for 3 of the 4 years that I was at University Lake School in Wisconsin, then moved down to a school in Missouri, Whitfield School, and they eventually decided, okay, well, we want to go one-to-one too. The first thing that we did is we put a pause on that foregone conclusion about what we were going to do. We are going to go one-to-one. Really? Like, why? Because if all you want to do is go one-to-one, I can solve that with a purchase order, right? That's easy. I just got to buy enough computers to put one in every kid's hands. That's easy. Why do you want to go one-to-one? So the first thing that I figured out that we need to do before we get started on this is actually figure out what's our why. And so let's get into what is it that we're seeking. And that's where we kind of came up with that whole describe it 5 years from now as you walk into a room and you feel it. You feel that it's working. Okay. What does that look like? And you can start to use that exercise to kind of deconstruct what success looks like and start to turn it into a real why that you can then turn into processes and plans, right? Cool. And so starting with the end in mind, we wanted to do design thinking wasn't a thing back then. That's just kind of how old I am, but we kind of did design thinking before design thinking was design thinking, right? And
Cool.
and I won't say we did it as well as IDEO and Stanford either, but which is why I love their work so much. So starting with that end, what is it going to look like? What does success look like? Why do we want that? Why is that successful for us, right? So that you can start to create some definitions around what success means, right?
Yes.
And so starting with that. And then the other thing that we totally failed on the first time that we got way better the second time and successive times as we work with schools is the definitions have to be created inclusively.
Oh,
Sure. So definitions should not be created by an administrator who's not the actual user, right? So this kind of draws a little more into that empathize, right? Like who are the people who are going to live out that success? Our students, our teachers, our parents. Okay, great. How do they define success, right? So the way we kind of do this in our change management process is we say, okay, what is it that you're trying to get? Okay, great. Let's get a representative team together, a committee that's representative. When I say representative, usually when schools put together committees to do something like AI or any sort of technology thing, the committee is comprised of the tech people and the teachers who love using tech, right? And that's it. And that's a terrible way to plan.
all of the early adopters were like, let's do it.
Right. And then they wonder why it's not successful, right? So your whole planning process needs to be inclusive, right? And it starts with your sort of initial definition. So we say, get your tech people, get your administrators who are not strong with tech, get your teachers who are your rah-rah cheerleaders for tech in there, but also your mid-career teachers who are like, look, I know what I'm doing, but at the end of the day, when school is done, I got to get my 4 kids to piano practice and violin practice and soccer. And I just don't have time to give you my investment. And then you've got your laminated lesson teachers, right? I've been teaching this for 32 years the same way. And then you have your grumpy curmudgeons who are like, they might be young, they might be mid-career, they might be old, but these are the people who are like, I've seen enough of this BS that you guys drive at me all the time, and I am not playing your game. Get them all in your initial planning. You want all those voices there from the very beginning.
Would you also include some students in that mix, or would you focus mostly on like the teaching staff at that stage?
Well, it depends on the initiative, right? And so, like if you're talking about student computing, heck yeah, right? Get them involved in that process, right? But if you're talking about like more administrative systems and that kind of stuff, maybe not, right? Even though they might be impacted, it's going to be fairly indirectly impacted, right? But empathize means who's affected. And if everyone's affected, you need to get all of those representative voices in there, right? And that's just your starting point, and let them define what success looks like. Okay. Now, everyone needs to understand that that's a soft definition at this point. And then what we do is we meet with groups of teachers, administrators, parents, students, and we make sure that each of those groups is representative as well, right? And we're talking with them about what's working, what's not. Why should we do this? What does this mean to you? If one of your success criteria is collaboration, what does collaboration mean, right? Because you're going to get very different definitions. And you can test with them. This is what our group says collaboration means. How do we do? Does this hit the mark? What's missing? What's wrong? And let your community start to define. Now, you also need to set expectations. And that's not really part of the whole design thinking process, but it's just part of good management is I hear you, but you're not the only voice, right?
Okay.
And so I am capturing this, but you're not the only voice, right? So that people understand that just because they said something doesn't mean that it's the end all be all of what everyone is doing. And there are a lot of people in your organization who understand that. There are some people in your organization, in every organization, who have trouble seeing the world outside of themselves, right? And so managing expectations is part of that process as well. One of the ways that we do that is then after we have done these representative mini groups, then focus groups, then we actually put together a survey tool to help us measure our success. And it also is designed to help us figure out where are we today, right? Because you need to know where you are today to know if you're actually making progress, right? It's hard to measure if you don't know where 0 is, right? And so you measure, what are the things that are most important to us? How would we define that? Then you start to ask people. We like to break this into sort of 2 groups, attitudes and observations, right? Attitudes and actual actions, right? So we say, like, we use Likert scale on a scale of 1 to 10 or on a scale of 1 to 5. I believe this, right? Strongly agree, strongly disagree. Those are your attitudes. And then on the actions, it's like on a scale of 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10, how frequently do I engage in this defined behavior, right?
Mm.
And then we also ask, how engaged are students in these behaviors and how engaged are faculty in this behavior? Because if it's a student faculty thing, we love to be able to say, hey guys, there's a real gap here. Teachers say, I'm doing this. And students say, you are not doing this, right?
Okay.
And so we start to gather that. That kind of data now helps your community become honest and transparent with the things that they said in those earlier phases, right? So we have that. And then you can build data-driven plans around those kinds of things. But the cool part is if you've been inclusive in the definitions and in the clarity of the definitions and in the data gathering of where we are with this process, now your community is a part of the process, right?
There's
And
buy-in automatically.
which gets you buy-in, which is huge. It's where most systems fail, right?
Right.
Is
To you.
Yeah, right. It's something that's happening to you, not with you, and certainly not for you, right?
Well,
Whereas if you are inclusive and truly empathize in your process all the way through, you're going to get better buy-in, better commitment, better work on that. And then I mentioned humility. Part of that is transparency, right? Like you got to share your data. And we learned that too. Like if we planned in a vacuum, if we implemented in a vacuum, we had only vacuum success, right? But if you plan inclusively, if you work inclusively, and if you share the data inclusively, you gain trust as well.
Alex, I've got to point something out to you that I'm pretty amused with over here.
Yeah.
Because you just described, and I know it's based off of Ideas Framework, but I think you might have a framework of your own because your last name is Inman, and there's the 3 ins of change: intention, inclusion, and insight. Intention
Wow.
being that clear success criteria, inclusion, shared language, and boundary setting, and then insights with the data. I think you got your own framework.
Wow. The in framework.
The 3 ins to change. I mean, come on now.
So that's great. I've never had that insight myself. So
Hey.
I don't have the insightfulness that you just described to process. But let me tell you, my podcast co-host who will listen to this podcast is rolling his eyes at this moment.
Bob, come on, man.
Sorry, Bob.
Bob. So before we started talking about kind of the takeaways of change management, you were drawing some parallels between AI and one-to-one. And in our first discussion, you talked about kind of the juxtaposition between one-to-one COVID tech changes and AI.
Yeah.
You might kind of speak to those. Those have been kind of our big changes in the tech space.
Yeah.
And what are their similarities and differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, we beat to death that whole sort of change process on one-to-one, right? So we kind of walked you through that. And sort of the nuggets to glean from that is that your process needs to be thoughtful, inclusive. And so in COVID was the most rapid move to one-to-one that we ever saw. It was a very, very, very slow movement in the industry towards one-to-one. Started in the US, the earliest I know of in the US is 1996, Clovis Unified. And it was just 1 or 2 schools in the district, right? And they started in 96, and this is pre-wireless internet. It was a really amazing thing to see. It was really cool. And they were extremely thoughtful and deliberate in their process. And I learned from that after having made my own mistakes and all that kind of stuff. COVID, a little over 25% of schools and districts in the US that were not one-to-one went one-to-one in like a matter of weeks, right? And that is a stunning, and education just does not have any historical example of that kind of change in that kind of timeline, period.
So fast.
Like I can think of nothing that's even close, right? And the shift in terms of the role of the teacher was even greater than a traditional one-to-one program, right? So a window of change that was shorter, faster, less inclusive, and even greater in scope in terms of the context, right? Because you weren't even teaching the kids in person, right? You were teaching them remotely. So it was just an absurd amount of change.
Building
In
the
an
plane while flying
absurd,
it.
what's that?
Building the plane while flying it.
Oh, I mean, we're even worse, right? I mean, it was just insane. The amount of change in the short period of time that had to happen. And some of those schools that had done thoughtful change management around their one-to-one, they realized this is actually not a hard change. And they did reasonably well. But those who were starting from scratch, good God, I mean, just an enormous amount. Then what happened is COVID ended, right? Students came back. The devices were still there. And so none of the sort of shared understanding, shared expectations, shared definitions existed in these schools. And so the quality of the use was just absolute garbage, right? It was absolute garbage. And so they were used as note takers. They were just told to close them down, get rid of them. I just recently talked to a school that said, well, we were one-to-one during COVID. And then when we came back, we realized that was a serious mistake. And so we got rid of the devices. And
because to what you said earlier, it's not just a shift in devices, it's a change in your pedagogy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's a shift towards student-centered learning. So if
Yes.
you're still sage on the stage, direct instruction, didactic learning, a device is just a distraction.
Absolutely. And in those schools, that's how they wanted to teach, right? Now, hey, one of the things that I've learned in working with so many schools is culture is culture, right? And unless it's harming people, it's neither right nor wrong. And the reality is there are some students for whom a real sort of sage on the stage didactic teacher, it's what they want, it's what they are good at, and they will seek that kind of model for the rest of their lives. And the reality is it's so entrenched in American culture and from schools to businesses. The reality is if that's who you want to be, you can find that for almost your entire life, right? You're not going to be an entrepreneur. You're not going to be a major innovator. You're not going to be a disruptor. Those people for whom that culture is what they want, they don't care. They don't want to be any of that, right? And so technology still plays a role in those schools, but it may not look the same way that it looks at a school that wants to be progressive disruptors, wants to create students who are going to shake up and change the world. If that's really what you want, good on you. But you're going to design your technology program very differently than a school that very much does not want that, right? So little sort of cultural context that I think is sort of necessary in all this. But yeah, you're right. If you didn't shift your pedagogy, you just shifted the delivery method from face-to-face to online to face-to-face. And you didn't think about the context and the fact that putting a device with that kind of power in a kid's hands is a fundamental shift in how you think about teaching and learning on a day-to-day basis. It's going to be a distraction.
Right. Because
so,
your power's gone. If you're
that's right.
stage on the stage, your power is in your knowledge. And now knowledge is distributed. So you've lost that power hierarchy.
I'm glad you said that. I think I maybe danced around that, but power dynamics are a very real part of any kind of human communication.
Right.
And how you leverage power dynamics can be incredibly facilitating and empowering to your outcome. When I talked about humility and inclusiveness, we're addressing individual versus shared power dynamics, right? And if you don't know what your outcome is, and if you haven't clearly defined your outcome as something that is collective in nature versus individual in nature, if that's not how you've defined things, then how you understand processes is going to be incredibly different, right? If there are a lot of teachers who believe that sage on the stage is how you should teach. Now, if you don't take the time to define student success,
right,
I'm not sure that that teacher has been given any reason to believe differently, right?
And why should they? It's worked.
And why should they? Exactly.
How they've learned. And if they're not seeing that research and data, they're not being engaged in challenging discussions that are, again, provoking them and encouraging them to think for themselves.
Yep.
Those beliefs aren't going to change. So putting a device in their hands isn't going to do anything.
Well, and you said something too that I think is commonly overstated, seeing the research behind student learning, right? If they haven't seen that research, well, then they don't get it. the reality is they can see that research and still not get it, right?
Mhm.
Because if a teacher has been teaching for 25 years and they've seen their students go on to success, right?
That's their research. Yeah.
That's a lot of research. That's a lot of research. And there's a lot of research and education that has been debunked, right?
Right.
And so
Learning styles. Let's start there.
there you go, right? Right. The whole Gardner thing, right?
That. And that's just
Yeah,
one example. Right.
exactly. Comes out of Harvard, right? Research institution, reinforced for years, right?
Yes.
So and it can be debunked, right? So research alone, and this is one of the things that came to me with time, because
Mm.
as a young teacher who didn't have 20 some years of experience, I was pretty easily influenced by the research,
Newer
right?
is better. Is better is better.
Yeah. Well, and if there's peer reviewed research, there's good method, there's good process to it. It's easy to say that process was more rigorous than your observation in your classroom. So, okay, I'm buying this research, and I think you should too. And then as I've gotten older and started to understand my colleagues and peers who have taught for all those years and have seen some of these changes over time, I understand their resistance,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not saying that what they're doing is right because they've been doing it for 25 years, but somebody who has enjoyed success for 25 years doing pretty much the same thing is not going to be easily swayed. That's why inclusiveness is so important, because they have to be part of the conversations that are defining those challenges, right? And they know what they've done for 25 years is valuable. And they also believe that the teacher down the hall who's been doing something for 25 years is valuable. So when that teacher of 25 years hears his or her peer of 25 years talking about things differently, even though they may be foundationally the same, but differently, that process opens the minds to start to create that new definition. Whereas if that definition is brought in by somebody's book who was a great speaker at a conference, that's garbage to them. It doesn't carry the weight.
It's this dance of almost conservation and preservation versus innovation, I think, like especially in schools, because it's an institution. And so I think when you're going about these processes of change management, it's what's worth preserving and how do we make everyone feel safe in this process, that what they value is going to be taken forward and not just diminished or dismissed.
That's beautiful and so right. But the nice part is you get that if you have an inclusive process at every step of the path, right? Because
consent and buy-in every time.
Yeah, if you get those, like, I'll just say it, diversity has pure inherent value, period, end of discussion. The value of diversity gets bastardized in both directions, right? But it has pure inherent value just by bringing people's different perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you actively seek the diversity in your community as you go along, and obviously some communities are more diverse than others, but that's part of their culture. Now, there are weaknesses and strengths to all of that, which are a whole other topic, right? But when you're talking about change management within your organization, you must actively seek the diversity that exists within your organization as you are creating definitions and as you are creating what success looks like. And then the conversations about deconstructing why that is successful, why that is success, is with peers that are respected from different voices in different places and different lenses and perspectives within your organization. That's how you get the people who don't want to listen, right?
Okay.
And I guess another sort of piece of the process that I didn't really sort of call out is when you start small with a representative group, you get buy-in and effort from that group. Now your grumpy curmudgeon is not working against you. Your grumpy curmudgeon is actually working with you.
A cheerleader. Yeah.
So when he or she is sitting down with the other grumpy curmudgeon teachers at lunch, and the next phase of focus groups, I just got asked to be included in this focus group. That is like, what a heap of garbage. The other person gets to say, you know what? I thought it was a piece of garbage when they invited me to start defining these things. And you know what? It's not right, but we've got a good start.
Yeah.
What? Oh, okay. I'll do the focus group. And then it gets to the survey, and the person who's looking for the survey actually sees some of the perspective of the grumpy curmudgeon in the questions and how the questions are asked and what questions are asked. And there's a greater degree of buy-in there, right? So each step of the process, if it is inclusive, is how you open those minds. But if you don't sort of accept and recognize that people have a good reason to not believe what you want, and you involve them in defining it, you get there. Here's the problem with all this. So like
Takes time.
all this is time. That is totally it. And one of my colleagues, Sarah Hannawald, I've heard it several times, but she was the first person who told it to me. Sarah Hannawald said, I'm a big believer in go slow to go fast.
Yes.
And I was like, and I've heard that a lot of times since then, but this was like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, she told me this. And I was like, wow, it is so, so true, because we try to get things to go fast. And if we do it wrong, we're actually going to spend more time, more money, more effort and energy on getting where we want to go if we just go fast. That ready, fire, aim approach that a lot of organizations do looks fast.
But it's an uphill battle.
Yeah. And it's the head of school of mine at an organization that it was at East Coast. And so they like to move fast, right? They just, everybody was busy, but that's all it was. It was just busy. And after 2 years, my head of school said, Alex, I don't understand something about you. And I'm like, what? I was like, I hope I still have a job after this question. And he said, you get so much done, but you are so slow in your process. And I don't get how you get so much done by going so slow. And I smiled, and I am a Midwesterner. I've lived all over the Midwest. I am a pure Midwesterner. And the notion of going fast to go slow is just sort of, we don't say even going fast to go slow. We just say go slow because it's right, and people think that going slow means slow progress, right? And it certainly it can, right? But I said, oh my goodness. I said, I forget sometimes how people and this is DC. So DC's like Boston, New York, really pedal. I said, I forget sometimes how fast people move here, but I said, with total respect, how foolish it is. And he said, what do you mean? We do things fast, but not well. And if you do things fast, but not well, you have to redo them. Right. And when you redo them and when you have to figure out why you have to redo them, all that takes more time than just figuring out what you need to do in the first place. So I reminded him, I said, you went to college in Indiana, like 40 years ago. And he goes, yeah. Oh my God. He said there was this farmer who lived across the fence from the college, and I did work in his fields. And I remember him telling me, he used the phrase, measure twice, cut once, right? Oh. And he said, and it's fundamentally the same thing you said, sort of go slow to go fast. And if you're thoughtful and do it right, you're actually faster. I said, yeah. I said, Tom, when you say I do things slowly, I don't. I do things methodically.
Yeah.
And when you are methodical, it takes time, but it's ultimately faster. Right. And so, that's another sort of cultural piece that I think, this podcast, you drive this towards school leaders. And school leaders are the ones who sometimes are the ones who feel the need to move fast. Sometimes that comes from them. Sometimes it comes from their board. Sometimes it's, if you're a principal, it's coming from the superintendent, but
families
may also be getting it from the board or families, right? Good one on that one, Cindy. But it's important to know that quality change management done methodically is actually faster, cheaper, better, and requires less energy from everyone.
Very cool. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Mr. Methodical, if you're working with a school now, and I know this would definitely change based off context and different factors, but what does success look like in AI implementation? And what are those kind of cultural shifts that we're going to one-to-one made us be more intentional about power in our classrooms and about how teaching happens and how learning happens? What do you think that effect is going to be with AI? And what might success look like 5 years, 10 years from now?
Okay, so before I answer that question, I have to sort of be true to everything else that I've said and say it doesn't matter. What I say doesn't matter because our school cultures and communities exist for a very deliberate purpose, right? And so that should be defined by the school and not by somebody from the outside. Okay.
Beautiful.
And I think it could look very different. When I do think of AI, one of the things that I get most excited about is the opportunity for it to catalyze our humanity, right? So I tell you, the thing that excited me most, I will go back to one-to-one and then I'll get back to AI for a second. But the thing that excited me the most about one-to-one, which is still an unfulfilled promise of technology, I would say, is if the tech could handle the content and delivery and even some of the organization, which is even more true with AI. So this will be an easy bridge. It should have allowed us as teachers to spend more time focusing on the students and their individual needs as a learner, right? There's so much about human connection and human development that the great teachers are great at. And Cindy, in our podcast, our last question for everyone is who's your favorite teacher and why, right? And we ask that because we want to hear those stories, and the stories are wonderful about the connection and the inspiration. And it never has anything to do with the content, ever has anything to do with the content, right? And so my thought was, if we liberate teachers from the content, think about what they could do in the human development. Okay, so AI offers the ability to do that in so many more ways. And that I think is exciting. Like, can we use it to help us digest content faster, better? Yeah, great. So now what? It could give us more time for art, for human development, for human connection, for teamwork, for collaboration, for empathy, for all of the things that really drive a society, right? I'm not sure that it will. And the reality is, for the school communities and cultures who value the rigor with the content, AI may get in the way more than it helps, or the way you're going to choose to use AI is very different, right? It's almost like I want AI to just do the easy stuff for us so that we can do the hard human stuff better, right? But the reality is very few schools define student success around those things. There's portrait of a graduates and all that kind of stuff. I understand that and I see that. But the reality is they only want to develop those within the context of rigorous integration with content, right? And if I'm wrong about that, that's awesome. I want you to be honest with yourselves about that with the school. And I would love to come visit, learn from you, grow with you. If your school is really ready to embrace growing humans as your seriously number one primary goal. Because I just don't believe that there are many schools that do that. They say that they are, but the reality is they do so only through the vessel of rigorous integration with the content. And I can already hear some of my colleagues arguing against me in my head.
The beauty of it, though, I do think, and I think I've said this before on another episode, that it's my number one hope for AI is that we have a crisis of time and we have a crisis of purpose, because that would be ideal. We got a taste of it during COVID, right? The world shut down and we had to pause.
Yeah.
And we all were like, how am I filling my days? And is it bringing my life purpose and meaning? And I think we all thought that would last a bit longer. And then we got back to life and things went back to normal. And my hope is, like you said, that with this time that we're getting back.
Normal. We need air quotes for back to normal, right?
If we get more time back, that we're not just filling it, with pointless things, that I hope that we do get time back to, like you said, embrace our humanity a bit and lean into a life of purpose. Fingers crossed.
I struggle a lot with what you just described, just in my own personal life. I use AI tools to make me more productive so that I can do more work.
Yeah.
Right? Truth and reality is, and again, it's all about individual culture or communal culture. And I like work. I do. I feel like I'm making a bigger impact. I feel like I'm helping more people, and that fills my bucket.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's good. But the reality is AI presents to me a particular challenge where I probably could drive myself into the ground. And I think that this has been the case with almost all technologies over time, right? Like technologies allow us to be more productive. More productive means I can get more output for my work. So I should just keep working harder to get that output, right? I mean, it's the industrial age dilemma, right? And I am a cultural byproduct of that. So that is a risk for me as I look at AI, because I do genuinely value the productivity gains that it gives me. What I seek is to be more like my colleague, right? And I live in Colorado Springs. And as I look up, I'm literally looking at Pikes Peak right outside my window, right? And so what I want is for AI to give me the productivity that then gives me the freedom to challenge myself to be more human so that I can get out more, be more, connect more, whether it be with myself or with others, right? It presents an opportunity for me to do better with that which I want for myself, but I'm not good at.
I think you and I are doing the same homework right now. I just read the book Rest, Why We Get More Done When We Work Less. And I would very heartily suggest it. And I think when we shift that perspective of what we value and how we spend our time and the time we have autonomy over, that partnered with AI, I do think is just some powerful stuff.
Yeah. And I'm the chief academic officer of 4 companies. I'm in a position of influence. And we are a company that is committed to leveraging AI for our productivity. And we are also a company, the book recommendation I will give you is our CEO wrote a book called The Balance Equation. And the balance equation is sort of a response to people that he's known that have committed suicide and how to create balance in our lives, right? And so we've got the ethos in our company to do this. And I've got the personal interest to do this. And I've got a position where I can help with that, right? So I'm glad that you asked that question, because it forced me to think more about my desires for humanity, both with initially one-to-one and now with AI, and say, all right, Inman, do something about this with your 3N process.
Can we just come up with something amazing together? I think so. So funny. Alex, such an absolute delight to talk with you today. I think you bring such a cool perspective because you've got the history of the ed tech space and you're so connected in the community. So the perspective that you bring is just, it's so grounded in so many ways. And I just find it, I could talk to you all day. Such an absolute delight.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your excellent questions. We did a little planning before this, but you made me think a lot more and more deeply than I anticipated coming into this. So this was really, really fun, Cindy.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Learning Through Technology, a K-12 EdTech podcast, is brought to you by STS Education, a Pacific OneSource company. To learn more about how educators can leverage technology to drive successful educational outcomes, check us out at www.stsed.com. Connect with us by searching for Learning Through Technology in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss an episode. On behalf of the team at STS Education, thanks for joining us.